can't give you my blessing for this, Eli, he said firmly. Not when I believe you're making a grave mistake. But I won't curse you either. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip strong and familiar. The door will remain open, should you find the English world less welcoming than you imagine. Or should you come to your senses about what truly matters. It was as much concession as I could have hoped for from him. Not approval, but not complete rejection either. A narrow path left for potential return, should I choose it. Thank you, Pa, I said, meaning it despite the conditional nature of his acceptance. He nodded once, then stepped back, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional gulf opening between us. If you're determined to go, you'd best be on your way. It's a long walk to Millersburg. Mother made a small sound of protest. John, surely we could... No, he interrupted, gentle but firm. If Eli is old enough to make this choice, he's old enough to bear its consequences, including the walk. I nodded, accepting this small punishment as reasonable. Even necessary to... Actions had consequences. This was one of the first lessons our community taught its children. If I was choosing to step away from our ways, I needed to do so fully conscious of what that meant. I understand, I said. And you're right, I should go. The bus leaves early. Mother embraced me once more, fiercely this time, as if trying to imprint the feeling of her arms around me into permanent memory. Write to us, she whispered. Let us know you're safe, at least. I will, I promised, returning the embrace with equal intensity. When she finally released me, stepping back to Pa's side, I saw that others had appeared on the porch. Jacob, clearly awake all along, and my younger siblings, roused by the unusual nighttime activity. Did you know? I asked Jacob, wondering if he had somehow alerted our parents to my planned departure. He shook his head, not exactly when. Just that you were thinking about it. His expression was solemn beyond his years. Be careful out there, Eli. My sisters watched wide-eyed from the porch, not fully comprehending what was happening but sensing its gravity. My youngest brother, only 8, rubbed sleep from his eyes and asked in a piping voice, Is Eli going away? Just for a while, Mother answered, her voice steady despite the tears still on her cheeks. To visit Isaac. Remember him? The simplified explanation seemed to satisfy the child, though the older ones regarded me with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been admiration for my apparent boldness. I looked at them all, my family, gathered in the pre-dawn darkness to witness my departure. The sight lodged in my chest like a physical weight, a memory I knew would travel with me wherever I went. I love you, I said, the words encompassing all of them. Please don't forget that. Then, before emotion could overcome my resolve, I turned and began walking toward the road, the canvas bag slung over my shoulder containing everything I was taking from my old life into whatever awaited me. I didn't look back until I reached the end of our lane, where it met the main road. There, I paused and turned for one last glimpse of home. The farmhouse stood silhouetted against the gradually lightening eastern sky, my family still visible as small figures clustered on and around the porch. The barn loomed beside it, solid and familiar, the hayloft window a dark square in its upper story. Beyond stretched the fields, faintly visible now as the first true light of dawn began to wash across the landscape. It was beautiful. It was home. And I was leaving it behind, walking away from certainty toward a future I could barely imagine. With one final look, I turned and continued down the road toward Millersburg, each step taking me further from everything I had known, closer to the life that might be possible with Isaac. The walk to town passed in a kind of dreamlike state. As darkness gave way to dawn, the world around me transformed. Dew glittering on roadside grasses, birds awakening with tentative songs, the eastern sky painted in increasingly vibrant shades of pink and gold. I walked steadily, my mind alternating between racing thoughts and strange, calm emptiness. Had I made the right choice? Was I being selfish, prioritizing my own happiness over family obligation? What would await me in Lancaster, beyond Isaac's welcoming arms? No answers came, only the rhythm of my footsteps on the packed dirt road and the gradual brightening of the day around me. I reached Millersburg just as the town was beginning to stir, shopkeepers unlocking doors, early risers heading to work. The bus station, when I arrived, was already open, a sleepy-eyed clerk behind the counter and a handful of travelers waiting on benches with luggage at their feet. "One way to Philadelphia," I said, placing my carefully saved money on the counter. The ticket seller barely glanced at me, recognizing me from my visit days before. "Eli Fisher," she confirmed, consulting her computer. "Bus leaves in 25 minutes. Platform 2. The transaction was so mundane, so anticlimactic given the emotional weight of my departure, that I almost laughed. The English world continued on its busy way, utterly indifferent to the momentous choice I had just made, the bridges I had potentially burned. I took my ticket and found a seat in the small waiting area, my canvas bag between my feet. Around me, other travelers dozed or stared at glowing screens, phones or tablets, the technology still somewhat foreign and intimidating to me, despite my limited exposure during Rumspringa. Would I adapt to such things? Learn to navigate the constant connectivity, the barrage of information that characterized the English world? Or would I remain forever somewhat apart, marked by my upbringing even as I tried to build a new life? These questions circled in my mind as I waited, watching the minutes tick by on the large clock mounted on the station wall. Each minute brought me closer to departure, to the irrevocable step I was about to take. At 5 minutes before boarding, I reached into my shirt and withdrew the bundle of letters, bound with their simple ribbon. I untied it carefully, selecting one letter from the middle of the stack, the one where Isaac had first hinted at the true nature of his feelings, the one that had opened my eyes to possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. I read it again, drawing strength from the honesty of his words, the courage it must have taken to write them. Then I rebound the bundle and returned it to its place against my heart. "Bus 217 to Philadelphia now boarding at Platform 2, announced a tinny voice over the station's speakers. I rose, gathering my bag, and moved with the small group of fellow travelers toward the designated platform. The bus waited, engine idling, its destination displayed in illuminated letters across its front. As I joined the line of passengers boarding, a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration washed through me. This was really happening. I was leaving, not just physically departing, but stepping away from an entire way of life, an identity that had defined me since birth. I handed my ticket to the driver, received a cursory nod in return, and climbed the steps into the bus. Finding an empty seat by a window, I stowed my bag beneath it and sat down, hands folded tightly in my lap to stop their trembling. Through that window, I could see Millersburg waking fully to the new day. People hurrying along sidewalks, cars moving through intersections. The ordinary business of life continuing as it always had. As it would continue without me. The driver closed the doors with a pneumatic hiss, and the bus began to move, pulling away from the station and turning onto the main street that would eventually lead to the highway. As we passed the town limits, the landscape opened up again. Rolling farmland interspersed with patches of woodland. Familiar territory I had known all my life. We passed farms similar to my family's, where plain-dressed figures were already at work in the fields despite the early hour. I watched them grow smaller and eventually disappear as the bus picked up speed, carrying me toward a world I knew primarily through Isaac's descriptions and my own limited experiences during Rumspringa. Philadelphia, then Lancaster, then Isaac. The thought of seeing him again after these weeks of separation sent a flutter of anticipation through me, temporarily displacing the grief of leaving home. Would he be waiting at the station as promised? How would it feel to greet him not in secret, not in the shadow-striped darkness of the Hayloft, but openly, in the clear light of day? The questions carried me through the journey, through the changing landscape outside the window, as farmland gave way to increasingly urban scenery. Towns grew larger, roads wider, buildings taller and closer together. Everything seemed to accelerate. The pace of movement, the density of people, the sheer amount of sensory input. By the time we reached the outskirts of Philadelphia, my head was spinning with the novelty of it all. The bus navigated through busy streets toward the central terminal, passing people and places so diverse, so unlike anything in my experience, that I could barely process what I was seeing. When we finally pulled into the station and the doors opened with another pneumatic sigh, I remained seated for a moment, gathering courage for the next step. Philadelphia was only a waypoint. I still needed to find the train to Lancaster to navigate this enormous, confusing terminal without becoming hopelessly lost. "End of the line," the driver announced, glancing back at the few remaining passengers. "Everyone off." Taking a deep breath, I gathered my bag and stood, moving toward the exit on legs that felt suddenly unsteady. The noise and bustle of the station engulfed me as I stepped down from the bus, announcements echoing over speakers, hundreds of conversations creating a constant background hum, the movement of countless people in every direction. For a moment, I stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sensory assault. Then I spotted signs indicating directions to different areas of the station, including one marked trains, with an arrow pointing toward a set of escalators. I followed the signs, clutching my bag tightly, trying to appear more confident than I felt as I navigated through the crowds. The train station, when I reached it, was equally overwhelming. A cavernous space with high ceilings, electronic boards displaying arrivals and departures, ticket counters staffed by bored-looking attendants. Summoning my courage, I approached one of the counters. "I need a ticket to Lancaster," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Too quiet, too hesitant in this loud, fast-paced environment. The woman behind the counter barely looked up from her computer. "Next train leaves at 10:20, platform 7. $17. I paid, received my ticket, and moved away from the counter, consulting the large clock suspended from the ceiling. 9:40. 40 minutes until departure. Finding a seat on a bench against one wall, I tried to still my racing thoughts, to center myself amid the chaos around me. I was doing this. Actually doing this. Leaving behind everything familiar, traveling to meet Isaac, to begin a life I could barely imagine. The reality of it hit me fully for the first time, bringing with it a wave of panic so intense I nearly rose from the bench, ready to flee back to the bus station, back to Millersburg, back home where everything made sense. But home wasn't the same anymore. I wasn't the same. There was no going back, not really. Not to the person I had been before Isaac's letters, before the recognition of who I truly was and what I truly wanted. So I remained seated, watching the minutes tick by on the station clock, my hand occasionally moving to touch the bundle of letters inside my shirt, drawing courage from their presence. At 10 o'clock, an announcement directed passengers for the Lancaster train to begin boarding at platform 7. I rose, following the flow of people toward the designated area, my bag clutched tightly in one hand. The train waited, sleek and silver, doors standing open to receive passengers. I boarded, found an empty seat, and settled in for the final leg of my journey. Out the window, the sprawling city of Philadelphia gradually gave way to suburbs, then to the familiar rolling countryside of southeastern Pennsylvania. We passed farms that looked much like those at home, the same neat fields, the same white farmhouses and red barns, the same clotheslines fluttering with plain garments. The Amish and Mennonite communities around Lancaster were cousins to my own, following similar but not identical traditions. Would I find a place among them, or would I, like Isaac, build a life entirely separate from plain society, integrating into the English world while maintaining some personal connection to my heritage? These questions occupied me as the train moved steadily toward Lancaster, each mile bringing me closer to Isaac, to the future we might build together. When the conductor announced our approach to Lancaster Station, my heart began to race once more. This was it, the moment of arrival, the beginning of whatever came next. The train slowed, then stopped with a slight jerk. Around me, passengers gathered belongings, preparing to disembark. I remained seated for a moment, gathering my courage, then rose and joined the line moving toward the exit. Stepping down onto the platform, I scanned the crowd of waiting people, searching for Isaac's familiar face. There were dozens of individuals and small groups, families greeting returning members, business travelers hurrying toward exits, tourists consulting maps and guidebooks. But no Isaac. I moved further along the platform, thinking perhaps he was waiting at a different spot, but a complete circuit revealed no sign of him. Concern began to gnaw at me. Had he changed his mind? Had something happened to prevent his coming, or had he simply been delayed and would appear at any moment? With no way to contact him, no phone, no knowledge of his exact address, I found a bench near the main entrance and sat down to wait. He had promised to be here all day if necessary. Surely he would come. The minutes stretched into an hour, then two. Around me, the station's rhythm continued. Trains arriving and departing, passengers flowing in predictable patterns of arrival and dispersal. I remained on my bench, alternating between hope and despair, watching every new arrival for Isaac's face. As afternoon waned toward evening, my worry deepened. This was not like Isaac. If he could come, he would have. If he had been delayed, he would have found some way to send word. Something must have happened, something serious enough to prevent him from meeting me as promised. Just as I was considering what to do next, where to go, how to find him, a young woman approached my bench, her expression curious. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Eli? Eli Fisher?" Startled, I nodded. "Yes, how did you—" "Isaac sent me," she interrupted, relief crossing her features. "I'm Mara. I work with him at the bakery." She glanced at my plain clothes, my single bag. "He said you'd be easy to recognize." "Where is he?" I asked, rising from the bench, equal parts relief and renewed concern flooding through me. "Why couldn't he come himself?" Mara's expression grew serious. "His aunt took a turn for the worse last night. They rushed her to the hospital. Isaac's been there since midnight. He asked me to come find you, to explain." She hesitated, then added, "He was frantic about missing you, afraid you'd think he'd changed his mind or something." The explanation made perfect sense. Of course, Isaac would prioritize his ailing aunt, the woman who had helped him build his new life. "Is she going to be all right?" I asked. Mara shrugged slightly. "It's touch and go, from what Isaac said. But he wanted me to take you to his apartment, get you settled. He'll come as soon as he can." She gestured toward the station exit. "My car's just outside, if you're ready." I nodded, gathering my bag and following her through the busy terminal. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot where she led me to a small blue car. "It's not far," she said as we drove away from the station. "Isaac's place, I mean. Maybe 15 minutes." I nodded, watching the unfamiliar city pass by outside the window. A strange mixture of historic buildings and modern development. Horse-drawn buggies sharing roads with automobiles in a juxtaposition that felt symbolic of the threshold I was crossing. Mara kept up a stream of friendly chatter as she drove, telling me about the bakery where she and Isaac worked, about Lancaster's quirky blend of traditional and progressive elements, about how excited Isaac had been about my possible arrival. "He's been cleaning that apartment for days," she said with a laugh. "I've never seen it so spotless. And he's talked about basically nothing else for weeks. Eli this, Eli that. It was almost annoying, except he was so happy." Her words brought a warmth to my chest, easing some of the tension of the day's journey. Isaac had prepared for me, had eagerly anticipated my arrival. Whatever uncertainty lay ahead, at least that much was certain. I was wanted, welcomed. We turned onto a tree-lined street of older homes, many divided into apartments, judging by the multiple mailboxes visible on porches. Mara pulled up in front of a white two-story house with dark green trim. "This is it," she said. "Isaac's apartment is around back, above the garage." She led me along a gravel path to the rear of the property, where a detached garage stood, with an external staircase leading to a small covered porch and door. "Isaac asked Mrs. Brenner, that's the landlady, for a key," Mara explained, retrieving it from beneath a flower pot on the porch, "so you could get in if he wasn't back yet." She unlocked the door and stepped aside, allowing me to enter first. "It's not fancy," she warned, "but it's clean and private, and the rent's reasonable." I stepped into a small but bright living space, a combined kitchen and sitting area with simple, mismatched furniture that somehow created a cohesive whole. Plants lined the windowsills, thriving in the abundant light. A bookshelf overflowed with volumes on diverse subjects. Everything was neat, as Mara had mentioned, but also warmly lived in. A true home rather than just a place to stay. "Bedroom and bathroom through there," Mara said, pointing to a door off the main room. "Not much to it, but it works." I set my bag down carefully on a kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the realization that I was standing in Isaac's home, the space he had created for himself in this new world, the space he was now offering to share with me. It's perfect, I said, meaning it despite the apartment's modest proportions. Mara smiled. I'll leave you to get settled then. Isaac said to tell you there's food in the fridge, clean towels in the bathroom, and... She reached into her pocket and withdrew an envelope. This. I took it, recognizing Isaac's handwriting immediately. He wrote it this morning before he knew about his aunt, she explained. Asked me to give it to you if he couldn't be here himself. I nodded, suddenly eager to be alone with Isaac's words. Thank you for coming to find me, for bringing me here, for everything. No problem, she said easily. Any friend of Isaac's, you know? He's one of the good ones. With a small wave, she let herself out, leaving me alone in the quiet apartment. I sank onto the small sofa, the envelope still in my hand, and broke the seal. You, my dearest Ely. If you're reading this, it means you've chosen to come, to leave behind everything familiar, to take this leap of faith toward a future neither of us can fully see. I can barely find words for what this means to me. I'm writing this the morning of June 1st, as the sun rises over Lancaster. By the time you read it, you will have completed your journey, will be sitting in what I hope might become our home, if you find you can be happy here. I've tried to prepare everything for your arrival, cleared space in drawers and closets, stocked the kitchen with foods I think you might like, even bought a second chair for the small table by the window where I take my morning coffee. Small things, domestic things, but each one done with the hope that you might choose to stay, to build a life here with me. There is so much I want to show you, the bakery where I work, the small church I've found that welcomes all kinds of love as divine, the parks and cafes and quiet corners of this city that has become my home. I want to introduce you to friends who will accept you without question, who have supported me through my own journey of adjustment and discovery. But most of all, I simply want to be with you, not in stolen moments or through written words, but in the ordinary rhythms of daily life. Waking beside you, sharing meals, talking late into the evening about everything and nothing. I know the adjustment won't be easy. There will be culture shock, homesickness, moments of doubt. The English world can be overwhelming in its pace and complexity, but I promise to be patient, to help in every way I can, to create a safe harbor as you navigate these unfamiliar waters. And if, after trying, you find you cannot be happy here, if the pull of home and community proves too strong, I will understand. I meant what I wrote before. I love you enough to accept whatever choice brings you peace, even if that choice eventually leads you away from me. But for now, for this moment, you are here. And I am so grateful, so humbled by your courage, so filled with hope for what might be possible between us. Welcome, Eli. Welcome to the beginning of whatever comes next. With all my love, Isaac. I read the letter twice, then held it against my heart, tears blurring my vision. The tenderness of his words, the care evident in every sentence, it overwhelmed me, confirming that despite all the uncertainty ahead, I had made the right choice in coming. The moon hung low in the western sky, silvering the fields that stretched between the barn and the distant tree line. We had spent hours in the hayloft, talking, sharing memories, touching occasionally with the careful tenderness of those discovering each other anew. But dawn would soon break, and with it, the risk of discovery. We should go, Isaac whispered, glancing toward the small window where the faintest lightning had begun in the eastern sky. Your family will be stirring soon. I nodded, though every part of me resisted the idea of his departure. These stolen hours had opened something within me that I feared might close again once he was gone. A door to a different life, a different self that might remain forever unexplored. We moved toward the ladder, our steps hushed against the straw-strewn floor. Isaac descended first, his movements fluid and silent despite his city clothes. I followed, each rung familiar beneath my hands from a lifetime of climbing up and down. In the shadowed space below, the animals shifted sleepily in their stalls, accustomed to our nighttime comings and goings. A horse nickered softly, recognizing me even in the darkness. The familiar sound twisted something in my chest. a reminder of everything I would leave behind if I chose the path Isaac offered. We moved silently toward the small side door, furthest from the house. Outside, the air was cool with pre-dawn freshness, dew heavy on the grass. The farm lay quiet around us, peaceful in its slumber, unaware of the momentous conversation that had transpired in the hayloft above. At the edge of the barnyard, where shadows pooled beneath an ancient oak, Isaac paused and turned to face me. In his hands was the bundle of letters, my letters, the ones I had written to him over these past months, now neatly bound with a simple ribbon. He had brought them with him tonight, had read passages aloud in the hayloft, his voice catching on words I had written in moments of rare courage and honesty. "These belong to you now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper as he pressed the packet into my hands. "Whether you come or stay, they're yours. A record of what we found together, what we might still build." I took the bundle, feeling its weight against my heart as I tucked it inside my shirt. The paper was warm from being held against his body, carrying his scent, his touch. Isaac's eyes held mine in the fading darkness, blue even in the moonlight, filled with an emotion too complex to name. Hope and fear, joy and sorrow, certainty and doubt, all mingled together in his gaze. "If you choose me," he said, his voice barely a breath in the stillness, "leave at first light. I'll be waiting beyond the fields." He gestured toward the eastern boundary of our property, where the sun would soon rise over the line of trees that separated our farm from the main road. From there, it was a 3-hour walk to Millersburg, to the bus station, to a future I could barely imagine. "And if I don't come?" I asked, the question tearing from my throat before I could stop it. His smile was gentle, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Then I'll know you found your peace here, that the life waiting for you in this community is the one your heart truly wants." He paused, then added softly, "I won't write again. Won't try to pull you in two directions. You deserve that much freedom, at least." Before I could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to mine, a kiss both tender and fierce, as if he were trying to memorize the feeling, to carry it with him whatever I decided. Then he was gone, slipping away across the barnyard, a shadow moving among shadows until he disappeared into the tree line beyond the eastern field. I stood frozen, the bundle of letters pressed against my chest, watching the spot where he had vanished. The sky was definitely lighter now, the stars fading as dawn approached. Soon my family would wake, Pa first, then Mother, the younger children last. The day would begin its familiar rhythm of chores and meals, prayers and work. A day like hundreds before it. A day that could be the first of thousands more in this life I had always known. Or it could be my last day on this farm, in this community, among the family who had raised and loved me. I stepped back into the barn's shadow, my heart hammering against my ribs, against the packet of letters that held all our secrets, all our hopes. The choice loomed before me. Impossible in its magnitude, the only home I had ever known, versus the only love that had ever made me feel truly seen. As the first true light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, I leaned against the weathered barn wall, caught perfectly between worlds, between identities, between futures I could neither fully imagine nor easily relinquish. The farm, the faith, the family, the certainty of a well-mapped life. Or Isaac, freedom, love lived openly, the terror and exhilaration of charting my own course. Stay or go, safety or possibility. The known or the imagined. The weight of the decision pressed against my chest until it was hard to breathe, my thoughts circling without resolution as the light grew steadily stronger in the eastern sky. First light, the time of choosing was upon me. Then he was gone, leaving me alone to face another day in this new world we were navigating together. I moved back to the window, watching as he emerged onto the street below and walked toward his car, the familiar figure growing smaller with distance until he turned a corner and disappeared from view. The apartment felt suddenly too quiet, too empty without his presence. 3 days, and already I had grown accustomed to having him nearby, to the comfort of his voice. His laughter, the quiet sounds of his movement through shared space. Shaking off the momentary melancholy, I prepared for my own small expedition into Lancaster. The bookstore Isaac had mentioned seemed a safe destination. Quiet, contained, a place where browsing required no particular social skills or familiarity with English customs. I dressed carefully in my plain clothes, still more comfortable in the garments of my upbringing than in the English attire Isaac had gently suggested I might eventually want to adopt. Identity was not something to be shed like an outgrown coat, but rather transformed gradually, with intention and care. The walk to the bookstore was uneventful, my confidence growing with each successfully navigated intersection. Lancaster in daylight was less intimidating than I had initially feared. Busy but not chaotic, diverse but not overwhelming. A manageably scaled city that existed somewhere between the rural isolation of my former home and the urban density I had glimpsed in Philadelphia. The bookstore, when I found it, was exactly as Isaac had described. A small, independently owned shop with floor-to-ceiling shelves creating a labyrinth of literary treasures. The owner, an older woman with silver hair and kind eyes, greeted me with a smile that held curiosity but no judgment of my plain appearance. "First time visiting us?" she asked as I hesitated just inside the door. I nodded, somewhat surprised by the direct engagement. "Yes, my friend recommended your store." "Well, you're welcome to browse as long as you like," she said, gesturing toward the shelves. "Let me know if you need help finding anything specific." With that, she returned her attention to the book she had been reading behind the counter, leaving me free to explore without pressure or scrutiny. I moved through the shop slowly, running my fingers along spines, occasionally pulling out volumes that caught my interest. Our community had books, of course, the Bible, devotional texts, practical manuals for farming and homemaking. But this abundance, this diversity of thought and expression was entirely new to me. Philosophy, psychology, world religions, history, science, fiction, divided into countless subgenres. The categories themselves were a revelation, suggesting ways of understanding and experiencing the world I had never been encouraged to explore. I found myself drawn to a section on religious studies, where texts on Christianity sat alongside works on Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and traditions I had never even heard of. The implicit suggestion that spiritual truth might take many forms, that wisdom could be found in diverse traditions, was both unsettling and strangely liberating. Taking a book on comparative religious practices from the shelf, I found a comfortable chair in a quiet corner and began to read. Hours passed as I moved from that volume to others, following threads of interest, making connections between ideas, occasionally jotting notes on a small pad Isaac had given me. The owner approached mid-afternoon, offering a cup of tea, which I accepted with surprise and gratitude. "You remind me of someone who used to come in," she said, as she handed me the steaming mug. "Young man, dressed plain like you at first. Isaac, worked at Miller's Bakery down the street." My heart jumped at the connection. "Isaac Yoder?" Her face brightened with recognition. "Yes, that's him. Are you a friend of his?" "Yes," I said simply, unwilling to elaborate on the true nature of our relationship with this stranger, however kindly she seemed. "I'm staying with him for a while." She nodded, seemingly unsurprised by this information. "He was just like you when he first came in. Hungry for knowledge, trying to make sense of a world suddenly much larger than he'd been taught. Spent hours reading before they ever bought a single book." The parallel she drew between us was simultaneously comforting and disorienting. Had Isaac sat in this very chair, reading these same books, wrestling with similar questions about faith and identity and belonging? "He's doing well," the owner continued. "Found his footing here, built a life that seems to suit him." She studied me with gentle perception. "It gets easier, you know, the transition. Not quick, not simple, but easier with time." I stared at her, momentarily speechless at how accurately she had read my situation. "How did you—" "I've seen it before," she said with a small smile. "Not just Isaac. Others who have left strict communities. The Amish, yes, but also former Mennonites, ex-Hasidic Jews, people raised in fundamentalist Christian groups." She shrugged slightly. "Lancaster's that kind of place, close enough to traditional communities that those leaving often land here first." This was something Isaac hadn't mentioned, that there might be others who had walked this path before us, who had navigated the difficult terrain between worlds and emerged on the other side with their identities intact, if transformed. Do they? I hesitated, uncertain how to phrase the question. Do they find what they're looking for? After leaving? Her expression grew thoughtful. Some do. Some return to their communities, finding the outside world less satisfying than they'd hoped. Many create something in between. A life that honors what was valuable in their upbringing while leaving behind the parts that didn't fit who they truly are. The wisdom in her assessment resonated deeply. Perhaps that was the key, not wholesale rejection of my past, but careful discernment between the elements worth preserving and those that had constrained rather than nurtured my authentic self. Thank you, I said, meaning it for more than just the tea. She nodded understanding. You're welcome here anytime. And tell Isaac that Marion says hello. With that, she returned to her place behind the counter, leaving me to my reading and reflection. By late afternoon, my mind was buzzing with new ideas, new possibilities for understanding faith and identity beyond the narrow framework I had been raised within. I carefully reshelved the books I had been examining, thanked Marion once more for her hospitality, and stepped back out into the Lancaster afternoon. The walk back to the apartment seemed shorter somehow, my steps lighter despite, or perhaps because of, the intellectual and spiritual questions stirred by my reading. This, too, was freedom. The ability to engage with diverse perspectives, to question and explore without fear of censure. The apartment was still empty when I returned, Isaac not yet home from his hospital visit and work shift. I prepared a simple meal from the supplies in the refrigerator, then settled on the sofa with one of his books to wait for his return. As evening deepened into night, a curious peace settled over me despite the lingering strangeness of my surroundings. 3 days into this new life, I was beginning to see glimmers of what might be possible, not just between Isaac and me, but for my own growth and development as an individual with agency and purpose. The sound of a key in the lock pulled me from my contemplation. Isaac entered, looking tired but pleased, his face brightening visibly when he saw me waiting. "You're still up," he said, shrugging off his jacket. "I was afraid you might have gone to bed already." "I wanted to wait for you," I said simply. "How is your aunt?" He crossed to sit beside me on the sofa, close but not touching, still careful of boundaries as we navigated the physical dimension of our relationship. "Better each day. The doctors are talking about discharge next week if her progress continues." "That's wonderful," I said sincerely. "Yes," he agreed, though his expression remained somewhat troubled. "But it means making decisions quickly about her care. My cousin and I spent hours today discussing options." I nodded encouragement, waiting for him to continue. "The most sensible arrangement seems to be that she'll stay with my cousin in Philadelphia for the first few weeks of recovery," he explained. "The medical facilities there are better if complications arise. Then, once she's more stable, she'll return here to her own home." "And you'll help with her care then?" I asked, filling in what remained unsaid. He nodded, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of mild frustration. "It's not what I'd planned for our first months together," he admitted, dividing my time between work, her care, and... He gestured between us. Us. Building whatever we're creating here. The concern in his voice touched me deeply. "We'll manage," I assured him. "Your aunt needs you. That doesn't change anything between us." His expression softened with evident gratitude. "Thank you for understanding, for being so patient with all this." "Patient is what I do best," I said with a small smile. 22 years in an Amish community teaches that, if nothing else." He laughed, the sound brightening the apartment that had felt too quiet in his absence. "True enough." His eyes studied my face with sudden interest. "You seem different tonight, more settled somehow." I considered this assessment, finding truth in it. "I visited the bookstore you mentioned, met Marion." "Ah," he said, understanding immediately. "Marion's good bookshop. I spent hours there when I first arrived in Lancaster. She probably told you that." "She did," I confirmed. "And that there are others like us, people who've left similar communities, who are finding their way in this world." Isaac nodded, There's quite a network here, actually. Informal, but supportive. People who understand the challenges of transition because they've lived them. You never mentioned that, I observed. That there might be others who would understand what we're experiencing. He was quiet for a moment, considering my observation. I think I wanted to protect you, he admitted finally. From feeling pressured to make connections before you were ready, from having to explain or justify your choices to anyone, even others with similar experiences. The thoughtfulness behind his explanation was characteristic, always considering my comfort, my readiness, placing my needs above his own desire to integrate me quickly into his world. I appreciate that, I said, but I think it might help to meet others who've walked this path, to hear their stories, learn from their experiences. His smile widened with what looked like relief. There's a monthly gathering, very informal, just coffee and conversation. The next one is Saturday afternoon, if you'd like to attend. The invitation produced an immediate flutter of anxiety. Social interaction with strangers was challenging enough without the added complexity of explaining my situation, my relationship with Isaac, my reasons for leaving the community. Yet beneath the anxiety was a thread of curiosity, of longing for connection with others who might truly understand the journey I was embarking upon. I'd like to try, I said finally, if you'll be there with me. Every step of the way, he promised, his hand finding mine on the sofa between us. We sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the day's experiences settling around us like dust after a long journey. Outside, the sounds of the city had quieted somewhat as evening deepened into night. Fewer cars passing, voices more distant and sporadic. I should get some sleep, Isaac said eventually, reluctance evident in his tone. Early shift at the bakery tomorrow. I nodded, rising with him from the sofa. We moved together through the apartment's evening routines, checking locks, turning off lights, preparing for sleep with the synchronized ease that was gradually developing between us. In the bedroom, we undressed and redressed in night clothes with the careful modesty that characterized our physical relationship thus far. There had been kisses, embraces, the comfort of sleeping side by side, but nothing more. Both of us understanding without discussion that some transitions required time, patience, gradual adjustment. As we lay together in the darkness, Isaac's breathing already beginning to deepen toward sleep beside me, I found myself reflecting on the day's revelations. The bookstore with its universe of ideas. Marion's gentle wisdom about finding balance between old and new. The knowledge that others had made similar journeys and created lives of meaning beyond the boundaries of strict community. These discoveries were small but significant stepping stones on a path I was only beginning to discern. A path toward wholeness, toward integration of past and present, toward a future that honored both where I had come from and who I was becoming. With that thought held close like a talisman against uncertainty, I drifted toward sleep. Another day of this new life complete, another waiting just beyond the horizon. The weeks that followed established patterns that gradually transformed the strange into the familiar. Isaac's aunt returned from her stay in Philadelphia, requiring daily visits and assistance that Isaac provided with characteristic devotion. I found part-time work at the bakery, learning new skills while contributing to our shared expenses. We attended the monthly gathering he had mentioned, where I met others who had left similar communities and were navigating paths between worlds. Each day brought small challenges and quiet victories, mastering public transportation, completing my first solo grocery shopping, gradually expanding my wardrobe to include some English-style clothing while retaining elements of plain dress that still felt right to me. Through it all, Isaac remained my anchor, my guide, my companion in creating this new life. His patience never wavered, his understanding of my struggles never faltered, his love providing the secure foundation from which I could venture increasingly into unfamiliar territory. And slowly, tentatively, our relationship deepened in all dimensions: emotional, intellectual, physical. The careful boundaries of those first days gradually relaxed as trust and comfort grew between us, as the initial strangeness of intimacy gave way to a profound rightness that needed no justification beyond its own existence. Yet beneath the emerging happiness, questions lingered. about family left behind, about the permanence of my decision, about what our future might hold in a world neither of us had been raised to navigate. The letter that arrived from home nearly six weeks after my departure brought these questions sharply into focus. It came addressed in my mother's careful hand, delivered to our mailbox on a bright summer morning. I recognized it immediately, my heart racing as I carried it upstairs to the apartment we now shared fully, my belongings integrated with Isaac's in a physical manifestation of our merging lives. I sat at the small table by the window, turning the envelope over in my hands several times before finding the courage to break the seal. Isaac, sensing the significance of the moment, gave me space, moving to the kitchen area where he busied himself with coffee preparation while remaining available if needed. The letter was written in Pennsylvania Dutch, the dialect of German used within our community for personal correspondence. My mother's script was as familiar as my own heartbeat, the sight of it bringing an unexpected ache of homesickness. My dear son, your letter reached us safely. It brings me comfort to know you are well, though my heart remains heavy with your absence. The farm continues as always, the rhythm of seasons unchanged by sorrow or joy. Your father works from dawn until dusk, perhaps harder than before. Your brothers have taken on your chores without complaint. Jacob especially has stepped into your role with a maturity beyond his years. I won't pretend there hasn't been pain in your leaving. Questions from the community. Conversations with the elders that leave your father tight-lipped and silent for days afterward. Speculation that we try to shield the younger children from, though they understand more than we realize. Yet I find myself thinking often of our conversation that night, of the courage it must have taken to choose a path so different from the one laid before you since birth. To follow truth as you understand it, even at such cost. I cannot say I understand fully what led you away. Perhaps I never will. The way you spoke of Isaac, the light in your eyes when you mentioned his name. It suggests a bond deeper than friendship. A connection I have no framework to comprehend. But this I know with certainty. You are my son. My firstborn, the child who taught me what it means to be a mother. No distance, no difference in path or belief can sever that bond. Your father struggles more with these matters. His faith, his understanding of Scripture, his commitment to the Ordnung. These things are the foundation of his life. To question them, even by extension through your choices, shakes what has always been solid ground beneath his feet. Yet even in his hurt and confusion, he asks about you. Listens when I read parts of your letter aloud. Includes you in evening prayers, asking God to watch over you in the English world. The bishop has not yet spoken of shunning, though some in the community believe it should be implemented. Your father's standing as a respected elder has perhaps delayed such action. Or perhaps there is more understanding, more willingness to wait and watch than we might have expected. I don't know what the future holds, Eli. Whether there can be reconciliation, or if the gulf between our worlds will only widen with time. But I wanted you to know that you are loved still, missed daily, held in prayer constantly. If you can write again, we would welcome news of your life there, of your work, your health, your adjustment to English ways. Of Isaac too, if that brings you comfort to share. With love that knows no boundaries, your mother. I read the letter twice, tears blurring my vision by the second reading. The mixture of emotions it evoked was almost overwhelming. Relief that communication remained possible. Gratitude for my mother's tentative acceptance. Sorrow for my father's struggle. Hope that complete severance from my family might not be inevitable. Eli. Isaac's voice was gentle with concern. What does it say? I looked up to find him watching me from across the room, coffee forgotten on the counter behind him. It's from my mother, I said, my voice unsteady. They received my letter. They're not closing the door completely. He crossed to me then, kneeling beside my chair to see my face more clearly. That's good news, isn't it? Yes, I agreed, though the tears continued to fall. Better than I dared hope. But also, I gestured helplessly, unable to articulate the complex grief that accompanied even this positive development. Complicated, he supplied, understanding without explanation. I nodded, grateful for his comprehension. She asks about you. Says I can write about you in my next letter if I want to. Something like wonder crossed his features. That's unexpected, and remarkably open-minded, given the circumstances. She's always been the more adaptable of my parents, I explained, more willing to see beyond the boundaries of tradition when it comes to those she loves. Isaac was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. What will you tell her? About us, I mean. The question highlighted a reality we had been navigating since my arrival, that our relationship existed in a liminal space between worlds, defined neither by the marriage customs of the community we had left, nor by the legal frameworks of the English world we now inhabited. The truth, I said finally, or at least as much of it as she might be able to hear, that you are my partner in building this new life, that what we share is founded on love and respect and commitment. His smile was gentle, his eyes reflecting the certainty I suddenly felt. That sounds right. We remained there for several minutes, Isaac kneeling beside my chair, my hand finding his as the morning sunlight streamed through the windows of our shared home. The letter from my mother represented not an endpoint, but a beginning. A fragile bridge between past and present. A tentative opening where reconciliation might eventually be possible. I should write back, I said eventually, today, while the words are clear in my mind. Isaac nodded, rising to his feet. I'll finish making coffee, then give you some privacy. The thoughtfulness of his offer was characteristic, understanding my need for solitude to compose a response to such an emotional communication. No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Stay. This letter will be about both of us, about the life we're building together. I want you nearby as I write it. The joy that bloomed across his features was worth any potential difficulty in crafting the letter with him present. If you're sure, he said. I am, I confirmed. More sure of that than of almost anything else in this new life. He brought coffee to the table, then sat in the chair adjacent to mine, close enough for comfort, but positioned to give me space to write without feeling observed. As I began composing my response, describing our apartment, my work at the bakery, the gradual adjustments to English life, and yes, the deepening relationship between Isaac and me, I felt a curious peace settling over me. Not the complete resolution of all uncertainties, not the erasure of grief for what had been left behind, but something more nuanced, an acceptance that this journey between worlds would never be simple, never be finished, yet could still lead toward wholeness. The letter took shape gradually, words flowing more easily than I had expected. When it was complete, I read it aloud to Isaac, wanting his perspective on what I had written, particularly the portions that described our life together. Is it too much? I asked after finishing. Too honest about what we are to each other? He considered this thoughtfully. It's truthful without being provocative, he said finally. It acknowledges the reality of our relationship without demanding your family immediately understand or approve. He smiled slightly. It's very you, Eli, honest but kind, direct but considerate of others' limitations. The assessment warmed me from the inside out. To be seen so clearly, understood so completely, it was a gift I had never expected to receive in this lifetime. Then it's ready to send, I decided, folding the pages and slipping them into an envelope. I addressed it carefully, the familiar route designation bringing a momentary pang of homesickness that I acknowledged without allowing it to overwhelm me. As I sealed the envelope, I was struck by the symbolism of the act. Not closing a door on my past, but rather opening a window through which communication might continue, through which understanding might eventually flow in both directions. I'll mail it today, Isaac offered, on my way to visit my aunt. I handed him the letter, our fingers brushing in the exchange. Thank you. He slipped it into his pocket, then glanced at his watch. I should get going. She's expecting me by 11. He hesitated, then asked, Will you be all right? That letter must have stirred up a lot. The concern in his voice touched me deeply. I'll be fine, I assured him. I have the afternoon shift at the bakery, which will be a good distraction. And tonight, perhaps we could visit that cafe you mentioned last week, the one with live music? His expression brightened at this evidence of my growing comfort with English social spaces. I'd like that. He gathered what he needed for the day ahead, then paused at the door to look back at me, his gaze holding mine across the apartment we had made into a home. I love you, Eli Fisher, he said simply. Every day, in every way possible. And I love you, I replied, the words coming easily now, strengthened by weeks of living their truth. Now go, before your aunt wonders what's delayed you. With a final smile, he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the lingering presence of my mother's letter on the table before me. I remained there for some time, watching sunlight move across the polished wood surface, thinking about bridges between worlds, about how leaving doesn't always mean complete severance, about how love can stretch across divides that once seemed unbridgeable. Eventually, I rose from the table and moved to prepare for my afternoon shift at the bakery. Life continued with its practical demands, its routine necessities, even in the midst of emotional revelations and spiritual reckonings. As I moved through the apartment gathering what I needed for the day, I felt a profound gratitude for this space, physical and metaphorical, that Isaac and I were creating together. Not fully Amish, not fully English, but something uniquely our own. A place where both of us could exist authentically, integrating past and present into something neither of us could have imagined alone. The road ahead remained uncertain. Questions about long-term sustainability, about potential for deeper reconciliation with family, about our place in this world we were still learning to navigate. These had no simple answers. But the letter from my mother had reinforced what I was gradually coming to understand, that leaving doesn't always mean abandonment, that choosing a different path doesn't necessarily sever all connections to where one began. With that thought held close, I left the apartment and stepped out into the Lancaster morning, one more day of this new life underway, countless others waiting to unfold before us. 2 months to the day after my arrival in Lancaster, I woke before dawn with a strange restlessness coursing through me. Careful not to disturb Isaac, I slipped from our bed and moved to the window that faced east, watching as the first hint of light began to touch the horizon. The apartment around me had transformed gradually into a true home. Our belongings mingled throughout the space, evidence of shared life in every corner. Books we had read together lined the shelves. Photographs documented our growing social circle, the friends we had made among others navigating lives between worlds. Small treasures gathered on weekend explorations of Lancaster County adorned windowsills and tabletops. Yet this morning, despite all we had built together, I felt a peculiar tugging at my heart, a longing for something I couldn't immediately name. As dawn strengthened, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, realization dawned with it. Today marked exactly 2 months since I had left the farm, since I had walked away from everything familiar toward this new life with Isaac. 2 months that had transformed me in ways both subtle and profound. I was still Eli Fisher, still carried within me the values and memories of my upbringing. Yet I was also becoming someone new, someone who could navigate English society with increasing confidence, who was finding his own relationship with faith beyond the strict parameters of the ordinal, who was learning to love openly and without shame. The juxtaposition of what had been left behind and what had been gained created a bittersweet ache in my chest. Not regret exactly, but acknowledgement of the complexity of the path I had chosen. Behind me, I heard Isaac stirring, the soft sounds of his awakening familiar and precious. After a moment, his arms encircled me from behind, his chin coming to rest on my shoulder as he joined me in watching the sunrise. "You're up early," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Couldn't rest," I replied, thinking about everything. He didn't ask for clarification, seeming to understand instinctively the significance of the date. "Any regrets?" he asked instead, the question gentle but direct. I considered this carefully, wanting to give an honest answer rather than a reflexively reassuring one. "Not regrets," I said finally, but acknowledgement of what was lost alongside what was found. It's possible to be grateful for the new while still honoring the value of what came before. His arms tightened slightly around me, his cheek pressing against mine. "Yes," he agreed. "That's the balance I've sought these past years. Not rejection of our heritage, but transformation of it into something that can accommodate who we truly are." The wisdom in his assessment resonated deeply. This was the path forward, not erasure of the past, but integration of it into a present and future spacious enough to contain all aspects of our identities. We remained there at the window as dawn bloomed fully across the Lancaster skyline, each lost in private thoughts while taking comfort in the other's presence. In that quiet moment of connection, I felt a curious peace settling over me, not the absence of questions or challenges, but the growing confidence that whatever came next, we would face it together. I have the day off, Isaac said eventually, breaking the reflective silence between us. No bakery shift, no scheduled visit with my aunt. What would you like to do today? The question was simple, ordinary, yet it represented a freedom I was still adjusting to. The ability to choose how to spend my time based on personal preference rather than predetermined obligation. Could we drive out to the countryside? I suggested. Not back to the farm, I clarified quickly, seeing his momentary concern. Just somewhere with open fields and sky. Sometimes I miss that. The spaciousness, the connection to Lent. His expression softened with understanding. Of course. We could pack a picnic, make a day of it. The plan took shape easily between us, practical details of food and timing falling into place with the practiced coordination we had developed over these months together. By mid-morning, we were in Isaac's car, driving east out of Lancaster toward the rural areas that bordered the city. As urban density gradually gave way to more open landscape, I felt something in me relaxing, a tension I hadn't fully registered until it began to release. Not homesickness exactly, but a physical memory of growing up surrounded by fields and forests rather than buildings and pavement. Isaac seemed to sense this shift in my mood, his glances toward me holding a mixture of understanding and gentle concern. Better? He asked as we passed from suburbs into truly rural territory. I nodded, unable to fully articulate the complex emotions stirred by this landscape so similar to and yet distinct from home. The farms we passed were operated differently from those in our community, more mechanized, less reliant on horse-drawn equipment, yet the fundamental relationship between people and land remained recognizable. Eventually, Isaac turned onto a smaller road, then onto an unpaved lane that led to what appeared to be a public recreation area, a modest park with picnic facilities overlooking a small lake. I thought this might be nice, he said as he parked beneath a spreading oak tree. Quiet, but not too isolated, with a view worth seeing. The thoughtfulness behind his choice touched me deeply. He had found a place that offered the natural beauty and spaciousness I craved without the potentially painful reminders of community life that visiting an active farming area might have triggered. We carried our picnic supplies to a table situated on a small rise overlooking the lake. The day was perfect for outdoor dining, warm but not hot, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves overhead, the sky a clear blue expanse broken only by occasional wisps of cloud. As we arranged our simple meal, I found myself studying Isaac in this setting. How at ease he seemed in the natural world despite having adapted so fully to urban living. There was a fluidity to him, an ability to move between environments without losing his essential self that I hoped to eventually develop myself. What? He asked, catching my contemplative gaze. Just thinking about how well you've managed this transition, I explained. How comfortable you seem in both worlds, city and country, English society, and the memory of Amish life. He considered this assessment, his expression thoughtful. It wasn't always that way, he admitted. Those first months after leaving, I felt constantly out of place, too Amish for the English world, too changed to fit back into the community. It takes time to find that middle ground, to create an identity that honors both where you're from and who you're becoming. The honesty in his reflection was comforting, a reminder that the occasional disorientation I still experienced was normal, even necessary to the process of integration I was undergoing. And now, I asked, where do you locate yourself in relation to those worlds? He was silent for a moment, his gaze moving across the landscape around us. Now I see myself not as belonging fully to either world, but as creating something new that draws from both, taking what remains valuable from our upbringing, the emphasis on community, on simplicity, on faith as central to daily life, while embracing the freedom to question, to grow in directions not predetermined by tradition. The articulation resonated deeply with my own emerging understanding that the goal was not to become fully English, but to develop an authentic identity that acknowledged all aspects of my experience. That's what I want, I said, not to erase where I came from, but to build something new that can contain both past and present. Isaac's smile was warm with recognition. And that's exactly what we're doing, day by day, creating a life between worlds that belongs uniquely to us. We ate our picnic lunch in companionable conversation, talking of practical matters, work schedules, plans for the apartment, social engagements with the friends we had made, and deeper questions of faith, identity, and belonging. The ease between us was a constant marvel to me. How completely we understood each other, how naturally we had adapted to shared life despite the dramatic circumstances of our reunion. After eating, we walked along the lakeshore, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement through open space after weeks spent primarily in urban settings. The physical freedom mirrored the emotional and spiritual opening that had characterized these months, a gradual expansion of what felt possible, permissible, authentic to who I was and who Isaac and I were together. As afternoon began its gentle slide toward evening, we returned to the car and started the drive back toward Lancaster. The countryside rolled past the windows, beautiful in the slanting light of approaching sunset, a reminder of where we had come from that felt less painful, more integrated into the present reality of our lives. "Thank you for today," I said, as the city gradually reappeared on the horizon before us. It was exactly what I needed. Isaac reached across the space between seats to briefly squeeze my hand. "We can come back whenever you want. Find other places too. State parks, hiking trails, rural areas where you can reconnect with open space." The ready acceptance of this aspect of my needs was characteristic of his approach to our relationship, always seeking ways to support my well-being, to ease the challenges of transition, to create space for all aspects of who I was. "I'd like that," I said, though I'm finding I don't need it as often as I initially thought I might. The city is becoming, if not exactly home, then at least a place where I can imagine belonging. His smile was bright with pleasure at this evidence of my adjustment. "That's good to hear." We drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, each absorbed in private reflection as the familiar streets of Lancaster reappeared around us. The city that had seemed so overwhelming on my arrival now held landmarks I recognized, places that carried positive associations, the beginnings of personal history. At home, we carried the picnic supplies upstairs to our apartment. The transition from open countryside back to urban living felt less jarring than it might have earlier in my adjustment, a sign of the gradual integration occurring within me, the increasing ability to move between contexts without losing my center. As evening settled over the city outside our windows, we moved through familiar routines, storing leftover food, discussing plans for the coming day, preparing for sleep. The ordinariness of these activities held a profound comfort, evidence of the life we were building together, day by day, choice by choice. Later, as we lay together in the darkness of our bedroom, Isaac's breathing already deepening toward sleep beside me, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 2 months that had transformed everything, my understanding of self, of faith, of what might be possible in a life chosen rather than merely accepted. The road ahead remained uncertain in many respects. "They're ours," I corrected gently. "And yes, I'm sure. I don't need them anymore. Not when I have you in person." The smile that bloomed across his face was like sunrise, gradual but transformative. He held the bundle carefully, as if it contained something infinitely precious. "I'll keep them safe," he promised. "Maybe someday, years from now, we can read them together and remember how it all began." The casual reference to a shared future, years stretching ahead of us together, sent a shiver of both anticipation and uncertainty through me. Could we really build that life? Navigate all the challenges that would surely come with my transition to this world, with the continued secrecy or potential revelation to our families, with the everyday frictions that arose between any two people attempting to merge their lives? "I hope so," I said, meaning it despite my unvoiced concerns. Isaac tucked the letters carefully into his jacket pocket, then checked his watch. I should go. The hospital's visiting hours start soon. He hesitated, then added, Will you be all right here alone? There's food in the refrigerator, books on the shelves. The neighbors are friendly if you need anything. I'll be fine, I assured him, touched by his concern. Go take care of your aunt. I'll be here when you get back. He moved toward me then, drawing me up from my chair and into an embrace that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms around me were strong, secure, a promise of shelter in whatever storms might come. I love you, he murmured against my hair. I still can't quite believe you're really here. I love you too, I replied, the words coming easily now, strengthened by repetition and deepening truth. And I'm not going anywhere. With visible reluctance, he released me and moved toward the door. Rest, he urged. You've had a long journey. I'll be back as soon as I can. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone in his apartment, our apartment now perhaps, if things unfolded as we hoped. I moved to the window, watching as he emerged from the building below and walked to a small car parked at the curb. There was confidence in his movements, the easy assurance of someone navigating familiar territory. Would I develop that same confidence eventually? Learn to move through this world as if I belonged in it? The question lingered as I turned back to the quiet apartment, taking in its details more fully now in the bright morning light. It was small, but thoughtfully arranged, with touches that spoke of Isaac's personality. Plants thriving on every available surface, books sorted by subject rather than size or color, photographs arranged in careful groupings. I examined these more closely now, noting how many included the same small circle of people. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes who must be his aunt, a few young men and women around our age who appeared in various combinations, and, to my surprise, several older images from our community. One in particular caught my attention, a faded photograph of Isaac and me at perhaps 16, standing beside a newly constructed fence on his family's property. We weren't looking at the camera but at each other, caught in the middle of some forgotten conversation, both laughing. The easy companionship visible in that captured moment brought a lump to my throat. We had always fit together, even before we understood the true nature of our connection. Moving away from the photographs, I explored the rest of the apartment more thoroughly. The neat bedroom with its simple quilt that reminded me of home, the small bathroom with unfamiliar products lined on shelves, the main living area with its comfortable if mismatched furniture. Signs of Isaac's preparations for my arrival were evident everywhere. Cleared space in drawers and closets, fresh towels stacked in the bathroom, the refrigerator stocked with foods that included many of my known preferences. Each thoughtful detail reinforced the certainty that, whatever challenges lay ahead, I was wanted here. Welcome. Exhaustion from the journey and the emotional intensity of the past 24 hours finally caught up with me. Returning to the bedroom, I lay down on the bed that still held Isaac's scent, intending only to rest briefly. Instead, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, my body surrendering to fatigue now that the tension of decision and travel had finally released. When I woke, sunlight slanted differently through the windows, indicating several hours had passed. The apartment remained quiet around me, Isaac not yet returned from the hospital. I rose, feeling oddly disoriented despite the restorative sleep. For a moment, the unfamiliarity of my surroundings triggered a wave of panic. Where was I? What had I done? Then, memory returned in a rush. Lancaster, Isaac's apartment. My choice to leave everything behind for the chance at a different kind of life. Moving to the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face, then studied my reflection in the mirror above the sink. I looked the same as I had yesterday, and yet fundamentally changed, as if some essential shift had occurred internally that hadn't yet manifested in my outward appearance. Would that change come gradually? Would I slowly adopt English dress, English mannerisms, English ways of thinking? Or would I, like some who left our community, maintain certain aspects of my upbringing while adapting to this new world? These questions had no immediate answers. For now, I was simply Eli, caught between worlds, between identities, trying to find solid footing in shifting terrain. Hunger finally drove me to the kitchen, where I found bread and cheese and fruit arranged on a shelf in the refrigerator, clearly left for my convenience. The thoughtfulness of this preparation brought a smile to my lips. This was so characteristic of Isaac, practical consideration alongside emotional support. As I ate, I found myself drawn to the window again, watching the unfamiliar street beyond, the people moving along sidewalks, the occasional car passing. Everyone seemed to have a clear purpose, a destination, a reason for their movements. Would I find the same eventually? A job, friends, a community that accepted me as I was? The uncertainty was both frightening and exhilarating, a blank canvas awaiting whatever picture I chose to paint upon it. A key in the lock announced Isaac's return before I could spiral further into contemplation of the unknown future. He entered quickly, eyes immediately seeking and finding me by the window, his expression lightening visibly at the sight. "You're awake," he said, crossing to where I stood. "I was beginning to worry you might sleep the day away." "I nearly did," I admitted with a small smile. "I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I lay down." He nodded understanding, moving to set his keys on the small table. "Travel is tiring under the best circumstances, and your journey was more complicated than most." The understatement made me laugh softly. "That's one way of putting it." His answering smile was warm before his expression shifted to something more serious. "My aunt is doing better. The doctors are cautiously optimistic about her recovery, though it will take time in therapy." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "She's important to you. I'd like to meet her someday, when she's well enough." "She'd like that too," he assured me. "She's asked about you often, especially these past weeks." This surprised me. "She knows about me, about us?" Isaac's cheeks colored slightly. "She guessed, I think, from how I spoke of you. And when I finally admitted the truth, she was accepting. Not without concerns about the difficulties we would face, but fundamentally supportive. The revelation was both heartening and intimidating. Someone in the world, someone besides us, knew about our relationship, acknowledged it as real and valid. It made everything more concrete somehow, less like a dream from which I might wake at any moment. "That's good," I managed, trying to process this new information, though it's strange to think of someone knowing about us when we've been so careful to keep it secret. "It's what our life could be like," Isaac said gently. "Not secret, not hidden, just normal. Two people who love each other, building a life together." The possibility hung between us, tantalizing in its simplicity, its ordinariness. Could it really be that straightforward? Part of me doubted, having been raised to believe that the kind of love we shared was fundamentally wrong, sinful. Yet another part yearned desperately to believe Isaac's vision could become reality. "I'd like that," I said finally. "Though I'm not sure I know how to be normal in that way. It feels so foreign, the idea of not hiding." Isaac's expression softened with understanding. "It takes time," he assured me, "to unlearn secrecy, to become comfortable with openness. But it happens gradually, almost without your realizing it." He paused, then added, "And we can take it at whatever pace feels right for you." His patience, his willingness to move at my speed, rather than pushing for immediate adaptation, eased something tight in my chest. "Thank you," I said simply. He smiled, then gestured toward the door. "I thought we might take a walk, if you're feeling up to it. Just around the neighborhood, to help you start getting oriented." The suggestion sent a flutter of anxiety through me. Stepping outside meant officially entering the English world, being seen by others, navigating unfamiliar territory. Yet I couldn't stay within these four walls indefinitely. Sooner or later, I would need to begin building a life beyond Isaac's apartment. "All right," I agreed, squaring my shoulders slightly as if preparing for battle. Isaac's smile widened at my evident determination. "It's just a walk, Eli," he teased gently, "not a trial by ordeal." The humor in his voice loosened some of my tension. "It feels a bit like both," I admitted. "I know," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "But I'll be right beside you, and we can come back anytime it gets overwhelming." With this reassurance, I followed him to the door and out onto the small landing that served as a porch. The afternoon air was warm, scented with unfamiliar urban smells, car exhaust, cooking food from nearby homes, the faint chemical tang of industrial activity somewhere in the distance. We descended the stairs to the small backyard, then followed a gravel path around to the front of the house. The street beyond was quiet by city standards, a residential neighborhood of older homes similar to Isaac's landladies, many converted to apartments, interspersed with small businesses. "This is Mulberry Street," Isaac explained as we began walking. "The bakery where I work is about 10 blocks east. There's a nice park 2 blocks north, and the small church I mentioned is just beyond that." I nodded, trying to construct a mental map from his descriptions. The grid layout of the city streets was different from the rural roads I was accustomed to, which followed natural features, creeks, ridgelines, property boundaries established generations ago. As we walked, Isaac continued pointing out landmarks, a corner grocery store where he shopped for essentials, a cafe he favored for its quiet atmosphere and good coffee, a bookstore specializing in used volumes across a wide range of subjects. Gradually, the initial anxiety of being outside began to recede, replaced by a cautious curiosity about this place that might become my home. The neighborhood had a certain charm, trees lining the streets, small gardens brightening front yards, a human scale that felt less overwhelming than the brief glimpses I'd had of Philadelphia's urban core. People we passed nodded greetings or called hello to Isaac, who responded with easy familiarity. A few gave me curious glances, my plain clothes marking me as different even in this diverse neighborhood. But no one stared openly or made me feel unwelcome. "Everyone seems to know you," I observed as we turned onto a quieter side street. Isaac's smile was warm. "Small neighborhood. I've lived here nearly 2 years now. You get to know people, especially when you work at a place like the bakery, where locals come regularly." "And they don't mind? About you being Amish, I mean, or having been Amish." He considered this thoughtfully. "Most are simply curious. Some romanticize it a bit, have ideas about the simple life that don't quite match reality. A few ask inappropriate questions." He shrugged slightly, but overall, people here are accepting. They let you be who you are without too much judgment. The concept was both appealing and slightly disorienting. A community where difference wasn't automatically suspicious, where individuals could chart their own courses without rigid conformity to a single standard. "It sounds freeing," I said, "though I imagine it has its own challenges." Isaac nodded. "Freedom means making your own choices, taking responsibility for them. That's not always easy, especially when you've been raised to follow a clear path laid out by others." He spoke from experience, I knew, had navigated this transition himself, had found ways to build a meaningful life outside the structured environment of our upbringing. "How did you do it?" I asked. "Find your way when there were suddenly so many options, so many potential paths?" His expression grew thoughtful as we paused at a small park, sitting on a bench beneath a spreading oak tree. "Gradually," he said finally, "with a lot of false starts and mistakes. I tried to hold on to the values that still felt true: honesty, hard work, care for others, while letting go of the specific rules that no longer made sense to me." "And your faith?" I asked, the question that had been hovering since I first considered following him to this world. "Did that change too?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, his eyes focused on something distant. "It changed form," he said carefully. "The core remains, my belief in God, in Christ's teachings of love and service. But my understanding of how those principles apply to daily life, of what God truly asks of us, that shifted dramatically." He turned to look at me directly, his expression earnest. "I believe now that God made me exactly as I am, that my capacity to love, to form deep bonds with others, is divine in origin regardless of who that love is directed toward. That authentic living, being true to how I was created, honors God more than rigid adherence to human interpretations of Scripture." The conviction in his voice was compelling, echoing questions I had wrestled with myself these past months. If God had created the love I felt for Isaac, and I truly believed he had, then how could that love be wrong? How could following it be against God's will? "I want to believe that," I said honestly. "Part of me already does." But years of teaching aren't easily overwritten. I know, he acknowledged. It takes time. Prayer, reflection, finding a community that supports you in asking questions rather than shutting them down. Like your church? He nodded. It's small, humble, nothing like the grand English churches in the city center. But the people there understand what it means to seek God authentically, to wrestle with faith rather than accepting easy answers. He hesitated, then added, You'd be welcome there if you ever wanted to visit. No pressure, no expectations, just a place to continue your spiritual journey in a supportive environment. The offer was tempting, a middle path between abandoning faith entirely and clinging to interpretations that condemned essential aspects of who I was. I'd like that, I said, though I might need some time before I'm ready. Of course, he agreed immediately. Everything at your own pace, remember? We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as local residents enjoyed the park around us, children playing on swings and slides, elderly couples walking slowly along paved paths, young adults throwing frisbees on a patch of open grass. The normality of the scene was striking, people of all ages and apparent backgrounds coexisting peacefully, each engaged in their own activities, yet sharing the common space with consideration for others. Different from our community's carefully structured social interactions, yet fulfilling the same fundamental human need for connection and belonging. As afternoon began sliding toward evening, Isaac stood and offered his hand to help me up from the bench. The simple gesture, offering physical contact in public without fear or hesitation, reminded me again of how different life could be here. Should we head back? He suggested. You're probably still tired from your journey, and I promised my aunt I'd visit again this evening. I nodded, secretly relieved at the prospect of returning to the apartment's relative safety. This first venture into Lancaster had gone better than I'd feared, but the constant newness, the effort of processing so many unfamiliar sights and sounds was mentally exhausting. We walked back slowly, Isaac pointing out a few more local landmarks along the way. By the time we climbed the stairs to his apartment, shadows were lengthening across the street, the day's heat beginning to dissipate into the cooler evening air. Will you be all right here alone while I visit the hospital? Isaac asked as he unlocked the door. I won't stay long, just enough to check on her condition and speak with the doctors. I'll be fine, I assured him. I have plenty to think about after today. He smiled, understanding. I imagine you do. It's a lot to process. He hesitated, then added, If you're hungry before I get back, there's soup in the refrigerator. Just heat it on the stove. The knob turns to light the burner. The instructions reminded me that even simple daily tasks might require relearning in this new environment, cooking with gas rather than wood, operating electric appliances, navigating all the small technologies that English people took for granted. Thank you, I said, for everything today, for making this transition easier than it might have been. His expression softened. It's selfish, really, he admitted with a small smile. The easier I make things for you, the more likely you might stay. The quiet honesty in his voice touched something deep inside me. I want to stay, I said. Even though it's overwhelming and terrifying and I have no idea how to build a life here yet. I want to try. The joy that bloomed across his features was worth every moment of anxiety, every pang of homesickness, every uncertainty about the future. That's all I can ask, he said, that we try together. He pressed a swift kiss to my forehead, still careful, still mindful of boundaries as we navigated this new physical dimension of our relationship, then turned to leave for the hospital. I won't be long, he promised from the doorway. An hour, maybe 2. Take whatever time your aunt needs, I said. I'm not going anywhere. The door closed softly behind him, leaving me alone once more in the apartment that was gradually becoming less foreign, less intimidating with each passing hour. Moving to the window, I watched Isaac emerge below and walk toward his car, his movements confident and purposeful in this world he had made his own. Would I develop that same assurance eventually, that sense of belonging? The question lingered as evening deepened into dusk, as lights began appearing in windows across the neighborhood, as the unfamiliar sounds of urban nightlife replaced the day's activities. I prepared and ate a simple meal from the supplies Isaac had provided, managed after some trial and error to operate the shower, then settled on the small sofa with one of his books, a collection of essays on faith and identity that seemed particularly relevant to my current situation. The normalcy of these activities, eating, bathing, reading, provided a strange comfort amid all the newness. Some aspects of life remained constant regardless of setting. The human needs for nourishment, cleanliness, mental stimulation transcended cultural boundaries. As I read, occasionally glancing at the clock to track Isaac's absence, a curious peace began to settle over me. The decision had been made, the journey undertaken. Whatever came next, adjustment, growth, potential happiness, or unforeseen struggles, I had stepped onto this path willingly, with open eyes and full heart. When I heard the key in the lock announcing Isaac's return, I set aside the book and rose to greet him, eager to hear about his aunt, to share observations from my first day in Lancaster, to continue building the foundation of our life together. He entered looking tired but relieved, his smile warming as he saw me waiting. "Good news," he said, shrugging off his jacket. "The doctors are increasingly optimistic about my aunt's recovery. She was more alert today, able to speak in short sentences, to recognize everyone who visited." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely happy for this woman who had supported Isaac through his own transition, who had perhaps made possible everything that was now unfolding between us. "She asked about you," he added, hanging his jacket on a hook by the door. "Wanted to know if you'd arrived safely, how you were adjusting." This surprised me. "She knows I'm here?" Isaac nodded. "I told her yesterday, before her stroke, that you might be coming. She was pleased. Said she'd been praying you would find the courage to follow your heart." The thought that someone, a stranger to me, had been praying specifically for my journey touched something deep inside. That this woman, despite her current health challenges, would think of my well-being, would care about my choices. It suggested a kind of community I hadn't expected to find in the English world. "I'd like to thank her," I said, "when she's well enough for visitors." "She'd like that," Isaac assured me, moving to sit beside me on the sofa. "Though it may be some time before she's ready for new faces, the recovery process will be slow." I nodded, understanding, then asked the question that had been forming since his return. "Will you need to care for her? When she leaves the hospital, I mean." It was a practical consideration. His aunt had apparently lived independently until now, but stroke recovery often required assistance. How would that affect our plans, our tentative beginning? Isaac sighed slightly, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of mild frustration. "That's still being determined. She has insurance that may cover some in-home care, and my cousin from Philadelphia has offered to come stay for a few weeks after discharge." He looked at me directly. "But yes, I'll need to be involved in her care. She was there for me when I needed help most. I can do no less for her." The answer didn't surprise me. It aligned perfectly with the man I had always known Isaac to be, loyal and caring to those who had shown him kindness. But it added another layer of complexity to our already challenging situation. "We'll make it work," I said with more confidence than I felt, "whatever that looks like." His expression softened with evident gratitude. "Thank you for understanding. It's not how I imagined your first weeks here, dividing my time between you and hospital visits, potentially helping with her care once she's home." "Life rarely follows our careful plans," I observed, thinking of my own journey, how differently everything had unfolded from what I might have imagined even 6 months earlier. "No," he agreed with a small smile. "But sometimes the reality, however complicated, is better than anything we could have planned." His hand found mine on the sofa between us, our fingers intertwining with increasingly natural ease. The simple connection grounded me, a physical reminder of why I had made this leap into the unknown. We sat quietly for a while, the day's events settling around us like dust after a long journey. Outside, the sounds of the city continued. Distant traffic, occasional voices, the hum of mechanical systems. Inside, there was just our breathing, the subtle creaks of the old building, the companionable silence between two people who had known each other long enough that not every moment needed words. "What happens now?" I asked finally, the question encompassing far more than just the immediate future. Isaac's thumb traced gentle patterns on the back of my hand, his touch both comforting and electrifying. "Now we begin," he said simply, "one day at a time. Finding work for you when you're ready. Introducing you to friends who will welcome you without judgment. Creating a life that honors both where we've come from and who we're becoming." The vision he painted was appealing in its straightforwardness, its focus on gradual progress rather than dramatic transformation. Perhaps that was the key. Not trying to reinvent myself completely overnight, but evolving slowly, integrating new experiences and understandings while maintaining connection to the core of who I was. "I'd like that," I said, meaning it despite the uncertainty still swirling beneath the surface. Isaac's smile was gentle, understanding. "It won't always be easy," he cautioned. "There will be days you miss home terribly, days you question everything, days the English world seems too loud, too fast, too much." "I know," I acknowledged, appreciating his honesty. "But there will be good days too, I hope. Days when this begins to feel like a home we're building together." "Yes," he agreed, his smile widening. "Many of those, I believe, more than either of us can imagine right now." We talked well into the night, about practical matters like work possibilities and financial arrangements, about his aunt's condition and what her care might entail, about the community he had found here and how I might gradually become part of it. The conversation was grounding in its ordinariness, its focus on the day-to-day aspects of building a shared life rather than grand declarations or dramatic gestures. This, I realized, was love in its most authentic form. Not just passion or poetry, but the willingness to navigate mundane challenges together, to create something sustainable from the raw materials of two imperfect lives. As midnight approached, exhaustion from the emotional intensity of the past 24 hours finally caught up with us both. We moved together to the bedroom, the question of sleeping arrangements hovering unspoken between us. "I can take the sofa," Isaac offered, sensitive as always to my potential discomfort with new situations. "Until we've had time to figure things out between us." The consideration in his offer touched me deeply. "Stay," I said simply. "Please." His expression softened with something like wonder. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "We've lost so much time already. Been kept apart by distance and circumstance and the expectations of others." My voice grew firmer as I continued. "I don't want to waste any more nights that could be spent beside you, even if it's just sleeping." The smile that bloomed across his features was like sunrise. "Neither do I." We prepared for bed with careful politeness, still navigating the boundaries of this new intimacy. When finally we lay side by side in the darkness, close but not touching, I felt an almost painful awareness of his presence. The sound of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body, the faint scent that was uniquely his. "Eli," he whispered after several quiet minutes, "are you still awake?" "Yes," I replied, turning slightly toward his voice. "I just wanted to say—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Whatever happens next, whatever challenges we face, whatever adjustments prove difficult, I want you to know that having you here now is worth everything that came before. Every moment of separation, every painful choice, every day of waiting and uncertainty." The raw honesty in his voice brought a lump to my throat. "For me, too," I managed. His hand found mine in the darkness between us, our fingers intertwining with increasingly familiar ease. In that simple connection, I felt a promise more binding than any formal vow, that whatever came next, we would face it together, that the path we were choosing, however difficult, offered the possibility of a completeness I had never thought possible within the constraints of my former life. "Good night, Eli," he murmured, his voice already heavy with approaching sleep. "Good night, Isaac," I replied, squeezing his hand gently before releasing it. As his breathing gradually deepened and evened into sleep beside me, I remained awake, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the city beyond our windows, feeling the strangeness and wonder of this new beginning. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, practical matters to arrange, emotional adjustments to navigate, the continued process of finding my place in this unfamiliar world. But for now, In this quiet moment between one day and the next, there was a curious peace in simply being here, beside the man I loved, at the threshold of a life we were choosing to build together. I turned my head on the pillow, studying Isaac's profile in the faint light filtering through the curtains. The strong line of his jaw, the slight curve of his lips even in sleep, the familiar yet still wondrous fact of his presence beside me. This was real. This was possible. This was the beginning of whatever might come next. With that thought held close like a talisman against uncertainty, I finally drifted toward sleep, the first night of my new life drawing to a close as another waited just beyond the horizon. 3 days later, I stood at the window of Isaac's apartment, our apartment, as I was gradually coming to think of it, watching early morning light spill across the quiet street below. Isaac was still sleeping, exhausted from dividing his time between hospital visits, work at the bakery, and helping me adjust to life in Lancaster. These first days had passed in a blur of small adjustments and significant realizations. I had accompanied Isaac to the bakery, met his co-workers including Mara, who had retrieved me from the station, observed the rhythm of work that might soon become part of my own routine. I had walked the neighborhood in gradually widening circles, building a mental map of my new surroundings, discovering small pockets of beauty amid the urban landscape. And I had written to my family, a brief letter assuring them of my safe arrival, providing an address where they might write if they chose, expressing hope that understanding, if not acceptance, might eventually be possible between us. Writing that letter had been more difficult than I anticipated. Each word weighted with the knowledge of the pain my departure had caused. But it was a necessary step in building this new life with integrity, maintaining connection to my past even as I moved forward into an uncertain future. Now, as dawn light strengthened across the city, I found myself thinking of home, of the farm awakening to a new day, of chores being distributed around the breakfast table, of fields waiting for attention under the same sun that now illuminated Lancaster's rooftops and streets. The homesickness that washed through me was intense, but not surprising. Isaac had warned me it would come in waves, these pangs of loss and longing for the familiar. The key, he said, was neither to deny them nor to let them overwhelm me, but to acknowledge them as part of the journey, as the natural grief that accompanied any significant change. As I stood watching the day brighten, I heard movement from the bedroom, then Isaac's footsteps approaching. "You're up early," he observed softly, coming to stand beside me at the window. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, "thinking about home." He nodded understanding, neither dismissing my feelings nor trying to distract me from them. "It's hardest in the mornings, I found, when you wake up and for just a moment, forget where you are. Expect to hear familiar sounds, see familiar sights." "Yes," I agreed, grateful for his comprehension. "Exactly like that." We stood in companionable silence for a while, watching as the neighborhood gradually came to life, people emerging for work, cars starting, the day's rhythm establishing itself around us. "I need to visit my aunt again this morning," Isaac said eventually. "The doctors are talking about discharge planning already. She's recovering faster than they initially expected." "That's good news," I said, "though it means decisions about her care will need to be made soon." He nodded, running a hand through his sleep-tousled hair. "My cousin arrives from Philadelphia tomorrow to help sort things out. Between the three of us, we should be able to work out an arrangement that meets everyone's needs." The practical considerations were grounding in their ordinariness, not so different from how my community would have approached a similar situation, families coming together to care for an ailing member, responsibilities distributed according to ability and availability. "Let me know how I can help," I offered. "I may be new here, but I'm not unfamiliar with caring for others." Isaac's smile was warm with appreciation. "Thank you, that means more than you know." He moved to prepare coffee, the morning routine we had quickly established together providing structure to days that might otherwise feel unmoored. As he worked, I remained at the window, watching the interplay of light and shadow across the awakening city. 3 days. Such a brief time in the grand scheme of a life, yet it felt both longer and shorter, packed with new experiences, challenges, small victories, and moments of doubt. And ahead stretched, what? A future impossible to envision clearly, shaped by choices not yet made and circumstances not yet encountered. The uncertainty of it all, was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Without the predetermined path of my former life, each step forward would be authentically mine, chosen rather than simply accepted, built on the foundation of who I truly was, rather than who I had been expected to be. A small sound from the kitchen drew my attention back to the present moment. Isaac humming softly as he prepared our breakfast, a melody I recognized from childhood, one of the hymns sung in our community. The familiar tune in this unfamiliar setting created a curious bridge between past and present, a reminder that I carried my history with me, even as I moved forward into new territory. I joined him at the small table by the window, accepting the mug of coffee he offered with a grateful smile. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, each absorbed in private thoughts as morning light filled the apartment around us. "I may not be home until evening," Isaac said finally, "between the hospital visit and my shift at the bakery. Will you be all right on your own today?" I nodded, though the prospect of so many solitary hours in the still unfamiliar city sent a flutter of anxiety through me. "I'll be fine. I thought I might explore a bit further, perhaps find that bookstore you mentioned." His expression brightened at this evidence of my growing confidence. "It's on Elm Street, 3 blocks west, then 2 north. The owner is friendly, won't mind if you browse without buying anything." The simple encouragement warmed me. His obvious pleasure in my small steps toward independence, his understanding of both my need to explore and my lingering hesitation about doing so. After breakfast, we prepared for the day ahead. Isaac gathering what he needed for work and the hospital visit, me mentally rehearsing the route to the bookstore, a small adventure that represented another step into this new life. At the door, Isaac paused, his expression suddenly serious. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and discover this was all a dream," he confessed. "That you didn't really come, that I'm still waiting, still hoping." The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep inside me. "I'm here," I assured him, reaching to take his hand. "Really here?" He nodded, his smile returning. "Yes, you are." He squeezed my hand gently before releasing it. "I'll see you this evening." Then he was gone, leaving me alone to face another day in this new world we were navigating together. I moved back to the window, watching as he emerged onto the street below and walked toward his... "I can't give you my blessing for this, Eli," he said firmly. "Not when I believe you're making a grave mistake, but I won't curse you either." He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip strong and familiar. "The door will remain open, should you find the English world less welcoming than you imagine, or should you come to your senses about what truly matters." It was as much concession as I could have hoped for from him. Not approval, but not complete rejection either. A narrow path left for potential return, should I choose it. "Thank you, Pa," I said, meaning it despite the conditional nature of his acceptance. He nodded once, then stepped back, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional gulf opening between us. "If you're determined to go, you'd best be on your way. It's a long walk to Millersburg." Mother made a small sound of protest. "John, surely we could—" "No," he interrupted, gentle but firm. "If Eli is old enough to make this choice, he's old enough to bear its consequences, including the walk." I nodded, accepting this small punishment as reasonable, even necessary. Actions had consequences. This was one of the first lessons our community taught its children. If I was choosing to step away from our ways, I needed to do so fully conscious of what that meant. "I understand," I said. "And you're right, I should go. The bus leaves early." Mother embraced me once more, fiercely this time, as if trying to imprint the feeling of her arms around me into permanent memory. "Write to us," she whispered. "Let us know you're safe, at least." "I will," I promised, returning the embrace with equal intensity. When she finally released me, stepping back to Pa's side, I saw that others had appeared on the porch. Jacob, clearly awake all along, and my younger siblings, roused by the unusual nighttime activity. "Did you know?" I asked Jacob, wondering if he had somehow alerted our parents to my planned departure. He shook his head, not exactly when. "Just that you were thinking about it." His expression was solemn beyond his years. "Be careful out there, Eli." My sisters watched wide-eyed from the porch, not fully comprehending what was happening but sensing its gravity. My youngest brother, only 8, rubbed sleep from his eyes and asked in a piping voice, "Is Eli going away?" "Just for a while," Mother answered, her voice steady despite the tears still on her cheeks. "To visit Isaac. Remember him?" The simplified explanation seemed to satisfy the child, though the older ones regarded me with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been admiration for my apparent boldness. I looked at them all, my family, gathered in the pre-dawn darkness to witness my departure. The sight lodged in my chest like a physical weight, a memory I knew would travel with me wherever I went. "I love you," I said, the words encompassing all of them. "Please don't forget that." Then, before emotion could overcome my resolve, I turned and began walking toward the road, the canvas bag slung over my shoulder containing everything I was taking from my old life into whatever awaited me. I didn't look back until I reached the end of our lane, where it met the main road. There, I paused and turned for one last glimpse of home. The farmhouse stood silhouetted against the gradually lightening eastern sky, my family still visible as small figures clustered on and around the porch. The barn loomed beside it, solid and familiar, the hayloft window a dark square in its upper story. Beyond stretched the fields, faintly visible now, as the first true light of dawn began to wash across the landscape. It was beautiful. It was home. And I was leaving it behind, walking away from certainty toward a future I could barely imagine. With one final look, I turned and continued down the road toward Millersburg, each step taking me further from everything I had known, closer to the life that might be possible with Isaac. The walk to town passed in a kind of dreamlike state. As darkness gave way to dawn, the world around me transformed. Dew glittering on roadside grasses, birds awakening with tentative songs, the eastern sky painted in increasingly vibrant shades of pink and gold. I walked steadily, my mind alternating between racing thoughts and strange, calm emptiness. Had I made the right choice? Was I being selfish, prioritizing my own happiness over family obligation? What would await me in Lancaster, beyond Isaac's welcoming arms? No answers came, only the rhythm of my footsteps on the packed dirt road and the gradual brightening of the day around me. I reached Millersburg just as the town was beginning to stir, shopkeepers unlocking doors, early risers heading to work. The bus station, when I arrived, was already open, a sleepy-eyed clerk behind the counter and a handful of travelers waiting on benches with luggage at their feet. "One way to Philadelphia," I said, placing my carefully saved money on the counter. The ticket seller barely glanced at me, recognizing me from my visit days before. "Eli Fisher," she confirmed, consulting her computer. "Bus leaves in 25 minutes. Platform 2. The transaction was so mundane, so anticlimactic, given the emotional weight of my departure, that I almost laughed. The English world continued on its busy way, utterly indifferent to the momentous choice I had just made, the bridges I had potentially burned. I took my ticket and found a seat in the small waiting area, my canvas bag between my feet. Around me, other travelers dozed or stared at glowing screens, phones or tablets, the technology still somewhat foreign and intimidating to me despite my limited exposure during Rumspringa. Would I adapt to such things? Learn to navigate the constant connectivity, the barrage of information that characterized the English world? Or would I remain forever somewhat apart, marked by my upbringing even as I tried to build a new life? These questions circled in my mind as I waited, watching the minutes tick by on the large clock mounted on the station wall. Each minute brought me closer to departure, to the irrevocable step I was about to take. At 5 minutes before boarding, I reached into my shirt and withdrew the bundle of letters, bound with their simple ribbon. I untied it carefully, selecting one letter from the middle of the stack, the one where Isaac had first hinted at the true nature of his feelings, the one that had opened my eyes to possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. I read it again, drawing strength from the honesty of his words, the courage it must have taken to write them. Then I rebound the bundle and returned it to its place against my heart. "Bus 217 to Philadelphia, now boarding at Platform 2, announced a tinny voice over the station's speakers. I rose, gathering my bag, and moved with the small group of fellow travelers toward the designated platform. The bus waited, engine idling, its destination displayed in illuminated letters across its front. As I joined the line of passengers boarding, a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration washed through me. This was really happening. I was leaving, not just physically departing, but stepping away from an entire way of life, an identity that had defined me since birth. I handed my ticket to the driver, received a cursory nod in return, and climbed the steps into the bus. Finding an empty seat by a window, I stowed my bag beneath it and sat down, hands folded tightly in my lap to stop their trembling. Through the window, I could see Millersburg waking fully to the new day. People hurrying along sidewalks, cars moving through intersections, the ordinary business of life continuing as it always had. As it would continue without me. The driver closed the doors with a pneumatic hiss, and the bus began to move, pulling away from the station and turning onto the main street that would eventually lead to the highway. As we passed the town limits, the landscape opened up again. Rolling farmland interspersed with patches of woodland, familiar territory I had known all my life. We passed farms similar to my family's, where plain-dressed figures were already at work in the fields despite the early hour. I watched them grow smaller and eventually disappear as the bus picked up speed, carrying me toward a world I knew primarily through Isaac's descriptions and my own limited experiences during Rumspringa. Philadelphia, then Lancaster, then Isaac. The thought of seeing him again after these weeks of separation sent a flutter of anticipation through me, temporarily displacing the grief of leaving home. Would he be waiting at the station as promised? How would it feel to greet him not in secret, not in the shadow-striped darkness of the hayloft, but openly, in the clear light of day? The questions carried me through the journey, through the changing landscape outside the window, as farmland gave way to increasingly urban scenery. Towns grew larger, roads wider, buildings taller and closer together. Everything seemed to accelerate, the pace of movement, the density of people, the sheer amount of sensory input. By the time we reached the outskirts of Philadelphia, my head was spinning with the novelty of it all. The bus navigated through busy streets toward the central terminal, passing people and places so diverse, so unlike anything in my experience, that I could barely process what I was seeing. When we finally pulled into the station and the doors opened with another pneumatic sigh, I remained seated for a moment, gathering courage for the next step. Philadelphia was only a waypoint. I still needed to find the train to Lancaster, to navigate this enormous, confusing terminal without becoming hopelessly lost. "End of the line," the driver announced, glancing back at the few remaining passengers. "Everyone off." Taking a deep breath, I gathered my bag and stood, moving toward the exit on legs that felt suddenly unsteady. The noise and bustle of the station engulfed me as I stepped down from the bus. Announcements echoing over speakers, hundreds of conversations creating a constant background hum, the movement of countless people in every direction. For a moment, I stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sensory assault. Then I spotted signs indicating directions to different areas of the station, including one marked trains, with an arrow pointing toward a set of escalators. I followed the signs, clutching my bag tightly, trying to appear more confident than I felt as I navigated through the crowds. The train station, when I reached it, was equally overwhelming. A cavernous space with high ceilings, electronic boards displaying arrivals and departures, ticket counters staffed by bored-looking attendants. Summoning my courage, I approached one of the counters. "I need a ticket to Lancaster," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, too quiet, too hesitant in this loud, fast-paced environment. The woman behind the counter barely looked up from her computer. "Next train leaves at 10:20. Platform 7, $17. I paid, received my ticket, and moved away from the counter, consulting the large clock suspended from the ceiling. 9:40. 40 minutes until departure. Finding a seat on a bench against one wall, I tried to still my racing thoughts, to center myself amid the chaos around me. I was doing this, actually doing this, leaving behind everything familiar, traveling to meet Isaac, to begin a life I could barely imagine. The reality of it hit me fully for the first time, bringing with it a wave of panic so intense I nearly rose from the bench, ready to flee back to the bus station, back to Millersburg, back home where everything made sense. But home wasn't the same anymore. I wasn't the same. There was no going back, not really. Not to the person I had been before Isaac's letters, before the recognition of who I truly was and what I truly wanted. So I remained seated, watching the minutes tick by on the station clock, my hand occasionally moving to touch the bundle of letters inside my shirt, drawing courage from their presence. At 10 o'clock, an announcement directed passengers for the Lancaster train to begin boarding at Platform 7. I rose, following the flow of people toward the designated area, my bag clutched